Egypt, a land of ancient treasures and hidden secrets. Of all its kings and queens, one is still cloaked in mystery: Cleopatra. Lover of Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, and at one time the most powerful woman in the world. But evidence of Egypt's last queen has all but vanished from history.
Cleopatra is one of history's most famous figures, but there's a lot about her that might surprise you.
Finds that are helping to transform our understanding of this enigmatic queen.
She was a mother, she was a wife, she was a queen, she was a goddess.
Even more exciting, she's discovered hidden subterranean chambers.
I can confirm to you something, that somebody is hiding something.
From her unexpected family history to her random side hustles, the Queen of Egypt was way more than just a pretty face. Here are some of the weirdest facts about Cleopatra.
And in the biggest breakthrough in the search for Cleopatra, she may even have found the final resting place of Egypt's last queen.
It's a huge opening cut into the bedrock. When you do see them, they are the shafts that lead to tombs.
1. She wasn't Egyptian. Cleopatra VII is one of those historical figures everyone recognizes. But there's a lot people get wrong about her. Most people assume she was Egyptian just because she ruled Egypt, but her roots were actually Macedonian Greek. Cleopatra was born in 69 BCE into the Ptolemaic dynasty, which had been running Egypt since the days of Alexander the Great. The Ptolemies were super into keeping their bloodline pure, so they mostly married within the family. Yeah, it's as weird as it sounds, to make sure their Greek heritage stayed intact. Her father was Ptolemy the Thespian, but the identity of her grandmother on that side is a mystery. Some historians think it's possible Cleopatra had a bit of Egyptian blood from her maternal line, especially if her grandmother wasn't Macedonian. While we can't say for sure, it's a fun idea to imagine the last queen of Egypt being part Egyptian. What makes Cleopatra stand out isn't just her family tree, it's what she did as a ruler. Unlike her Ptolemaic relatives, who mostly ignored Egyptian culture and just spoke Greek, Cleopatra embraced the country she ruled. She actually learned the Egyptian language, which none of the Ptolemies before her had bothered to do. And she made a point of presenting herself as a traditional Egyptian leader. She even connected herself to the goddess Isis, which won her a lot of love from her people. Of course, Cleopatra's life wasn't all about cultural diplomacy. She had to fight hard to keep her throne. Her famous relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony weren't just love stories, they were smart political moves. Aligning herself with powerful Roman leaders gave her the support she needed to keep Egypt independent during a chaotic time. 2. She married both of her brothers. Cleopatra VII's life was anything but ordinary, and her marriages were no exception. Believe it or not, Cleopatra married not just one, but both of her younger brothers. This wasn't some scandal unique to her. Sibling marriage was actually a tradition in her family and in ancient Egyptian royalty. For them, it wasn't about love, it was about power and keeping the throne firmly in the family. Her first marriage was to her younger brother, Ptolemy III. It happened around 51 BCE when their father, Ptolemy the Thespian, passed away, and Cleopatra became co-ruler of Egypt. The marriage wasn't romantic. It was more like a political move to uphold Ptolemaic customs. The idea was that a king and queen ruling together, even if they were siblings, looked stronger and more divine. In Egyptian culture, this kind of union symbolized the gods like Isis and Osiris, who were siblings and partners. Of course, Cleopatra and Ptolemy the Thespian's partnership didn't last long. Things got messy, with both siblings wanting full control of the throne. This led to a civil war, where Julius Caesar eventually stepped in to back Cleopatra. When Ptolemy the Thespian died during the war in 47 BCE, Cleopatra didn't waste time. She married her other younger brother, Ptolemy X. Like her first marriage, this one was all about keeping appearances and ensuring no one could challenge her claim to the throne. But Cleopatra wasn't about to share power indefinitely. Ptolemy XIV was much younger than her, and after a couple of years, he mysteriously died. Some say Cleopatra might have had a hand in his death to eliminate any competition and solidify her rule. These sibling marriages might sound crazy to us now, but back then, it was just how things were done among Egypt's royals. The Ptolemies believed it kept the bloodline pure and reinforced their image as semi-divine rulers. Still, Cleopatra wasn't one to rely on tradition alone. She was a shrewd leader who used every tool at her disposal, whether it was marriage, alliances, or even presenting herself as a goddess, to maintain her power in a politically chaotic time. 3. She wasn't exactly considered a beauty. Cleopatra VII has been painted as this glamorous, manipulative seductress in everything from Roman propaganda to modern movies. But if you dig a little deeper, you'll find a much more interesting and complex woman than the one Hollywood or Shakespeare would have you believe. Sure, she's often tied to stories of Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, but there's way more to her than just her love life. Cleopatra's real power came from her brain, not her beauty. A lot of the stories about Cleopatra being this irresistible temptress were crafted by Roman historians, like Plutarch, writing years after her death. These guys weren't exactly unbiased. They had an agenda. When Cleopatra died in 30 BCE, Egypt became part of the Roman Empire under Octavian, later known as Augustus. To make himself look like the hero of the story, Octavian and his supporters spun Cleopatra into the villain, a cunning foreign queen who used her looks to corrupt good Roman men. It was great propaganda for him, but not exactly the full truth about who Cleopatra was. We don't have a lot of first-hand sources about Cleopatra's life, and most of what's out there comes from these Roman writers. Unfortunately, that means a lot of her achievements, especially as a ruler and strategist, get overshadowed by the drama of her relationships. The Roman lens tends to reduce her to just Caesar's lover, or Antony's downfall, which is such a disservice to what she accomplished. Even when it comes to her appearance, things don't line up with the over-the-top beauty myth. Coins minted during Cleopatra's reign show her with strong features, like a prominent nose and sharp jawline, far from the dainty Hollywood image. These coins weren't about making her look pretty. They were about projecting power and authority. Cleopatra wasn't aiming to be a beauty queen. She was a queen, period. What really made Cleopatra magnetic wasn't her looks. It was her personality, intelligence, and wit. She was incredibly well educated, speaking at least 9 languages, which was a huge advantage when dealing with foreign leaders and navigating the messy politics of her time. Her alliances with Caesar and Antony weren't just flings, they were strategic partnerships. She aligned herself with them to protect Egypt's independence and maintain her position in a world where Rome was gobbling up territories left and right. 4. She had her own drinking club. Cleopatra VII and Mark Antony's relationship is often seen as a grand romance, but it was more than just love and politics. It was also about having fun and enjoying life together. One of the most interesting parts of their story is the drinking club they started, called the Inimitable Livers. This wasn't just a party group, it was a reflection of their bond, their power, and their ability to mix business with pleasure during one of history's most chaotic times. The Inimitable Livers was created around 41 BC, not long after Cleopatra and Antony became lovers. Their relationship wasn't just romantic, it was strategic. Cleopatra needed Antony's military backing to protect her throne and Egypt's independence, while Antony saw Egypt as a source of incredible wealth. The club was their way of combining personal connection with public display, and its name hinted at their love for living life to the fullest, inspired by Dionysus, the Greek god of wine and revelry. Cleopatra, known for blending Greek and Egyptian cultures, made sure the club celebrated both traditions. The club's gatherings were wild. There were nightly feasts with mountains of food, endless wine, music, and games. Cleopatra and Antony didn't just sit back and watch either. They loved getting involved. Stories say they'd sometimes dress up in disguises and wander the streets of Alexandria, pulling pranks on locals. It was a chance to escape the pressures of ruling and enjoy some playful moments together. One famous story is about Cleopatra betting Antony she could spend a ridiculous amount of money, 10 million sesterces, on one meal. Antony thought she couldn't do it, but Cleopatra surprised him by dissolving one of her priceless pearl earrings in vinegar and drinking it. That wasn't just a flex of wealth, it was Cleopatra showing her cleverness and flair for the dramatic. But the Inimitable Livers wasn't just about fun. Cleopatra used the club to strengthen her alliance with Antony and show off her power. By hosting these extravagant parties, she made a statement to everyone, friends and rivals alike. that she was a ruler to be reckoned with. She understood that image was everything in politics, and these lavish feasts helped her project strength, sophistication, and generosity. 5. She used her status to her advantage. Cleopatra VII, the last ruler of Egypt's Ptolemaic dynasty, knew exactly how to use her image to her advantage. She wasn't just a queen. She portrayed herself as a goddess, connecting deeply with her people while also standing out as a powerful figure in the ancient world. Cleopatra understood that in politics, perception was everything, and she was a master at crafting her image to maintain authority and control. One of Cleopatra's most famous moves was aligning herself with the goddess Isis. In Egyptian culture, pharaohs were seen as divine, so linking herself to Isis wasn't just symbolic. It made her rule feel almost destined. She didn't just talk about being a goddess, she dressed the part too. Cleopatra would wear elaborate costumes during ceremonies, fully embodying Isis to show her connection to Egypt's ancient traditions. This wasn't just for the locals either. Her approach worked across cultures, blending Egyptian and Greek influences to strengthen her image as a ruler of both worlds. Cleopatra also had a knack for using luxury to show off her power. She surrounded herself with opulence, lavish feasts, exquisite outfits, and grand displays of wealth. This wasn't just for show. It sent a clear message that she was in control of Egypt's vast resources and could handle the grandeur expected of a queen. Historian John Fletcher once described her as a mistress of disguise, emphasizing how she used costumes and symbols to project an almost theatrical sense of authority. Of course, not everyone saw Cleopatra in such a positive light. After her death, Roman propaganda tore her down. Writers like Octavian framed her as a manipulative seductress who used her beauty to control powerful men like Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. This wasn't just gossip, it was political. By discrediting Cleopatra, Octavian boosted his own image and justified Rome's conquest of Egypt. Unfortunately, these Roman stories shaped how she was remembered for centuries, focusing more on her love life than her accomplishments. Cleopatra also faced a lot of bias because of her gender. In a male-dominated world, powerful women were often labeled as either too seductive or too weak, and Cleopatra got hit with both. Roman writers portrayed her as dangerously seductive, but also politically incompetent, a narrative that made it easier to dismiss her as a serious leader. Despite this, Cleopatra's careful self-presentation worked during her lifetime. Her image as a living goddess helped her solidify alliances with figures like Caesar and Antony. These relationships weren't just personal, they were strategic, giving Egypt a fighting chance in a world increasingly dominated by Rome. Cleopatra's ability to balance feminine charm with political authority was groundbreaking. 6. She was in Rome during Caesar's assassination. Cleopatra's time in Rome, especially during her relationship with Julius Caesar, was a pretty big deal. It wasn't just about the politics. Her stay there stirred up a lot of interest in Roman society and had a lasting impact on how people saw her, both in Rome and beyond. She arrived in Rome in 46 BC, bringing her son, Caesarion, with her. Caesarion was the son of Julius Caesar, which made Cleopatra's presence even more significant. It wasn't just a political move, it was also a statement. Being the queen of Egypt and Caesar's lover, Cleopatra was a foreign figure who immediately became a topic of conversation. Some Romans were fascinated by her, while others were scandalized. After all, she was an Egyptian queen living in the heart of Rome, and her relationship with Caesar was more than a little controversial. While in Rome, Cleopatra stayed in a lavish villa across the Tiber River. The villa was more than just a place to live. It served as a sort of temporary palace where Cleopatra could meet with important Roman officials and dignitaries. It also allowed her to maintain a certain level of Egyptian royalty while blending into Roman society, which was no small feat considering how different the two cultures were. Cleopatra's presence was a big deal culturally. Her style became something of a trend in Rome. Roman women, especially those from the elite, started copying her hairstyles and wearing jewelry similar to what Cleopatra wore. In fact, some statues of Roman women from this time were so similar to Cleopatra's image that they were often mistaken for her. It wasn't just about looking good, though. Cleopatra's fashion symbolized her power and her ability to influence not just political outcomes, but cultural trends too. One of the most controversial things she did during her time in Rome was allowing Julius Caesar to put up a statue of her in the Temple of Venus Genetrix, a temple dedicated to the Julian family. This was huge because it was almost like elevating her to the status of a goddess, which didn't sit well with a lot of Romans. To them, it was a sign that Caesar was blurring the lines between Roman tradition and the foreign influence of Egypt, which made a lot of people uncomfortable. However, Cleopatra's time in Rome was cut short after Julius Caesar's assassination in 44 BC. With his death, the political scene in Rome shifted quickly. Cleopatra realized her position was vulnerable without Caesar's protection, so she returned to Egypt, where she would find new ways to navigate the power struggles of the time. She eventually aligned herself with Mark Antony, Caesar's ally, continuing her role as a major player in Roman politics. 7. She used to lead a fleet in a naval battle. The Battle of Actium, fought on September 6th or 31st BC, was a game-changer in history. It was the final battle between Mark Antony and Octavian, which ultimately decided the fate of both Antony and Cleopatra. This battle didn't just impact their personal futures, it also set the stage for the fall of the Roman Republic and the rise of the Roman Empire. So, what led to this battle? After Julius Caesar was assassinated in 44 BC, there was a lot of tension among his followers. Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, and Antony, Caesar's ally and lover, ended up on opposing sides. At first, the two men were part of the Second Triumvirate, a political alliance that also included Marcus Lepidus. But over time, things soured between them. Antony's close relationship with Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt, became a major issue for Octavian. In 32 BC, the Roman Senate declared war on Cleopatra, painting her as a dangerous foreign queen who was influencing Antony to betray Rome. This really set the stage for the showdown. Both sides spent the next few years building up their forces. Antony gathered a massive fleet of about 500 ships, while Octavian had around 400 vessels under the command of his brilliant general, Marcus Agrippa. They met at Actium, a spot on the western coast of Greece, where Antony planned to face off against Octavian's forces. Antony's strategy was to use his larger, heavily armed ships to engage in close combat, relying on their size and strength. Cleopatra also got involved, commanding a squadron of Egyptian warships to support Antony. However, Octavian's fleet was smaller but much more agile. Agrippa made the most of their speed and maneuverability, executing a smarter strategy that quickly gained the upper hand. As the battle raged on, Antony's ships struggled to stay in formation, and the larger vessels became more vulnerable to Agrippa's forces. Then came a key moment. Cleopatra, seeing things were going badly, made a bold decision to pull her fleet out of the battle. She signaled her ships to retreat through a gap created by Antony's initial advance. Antony, in a panic, followed her lead and abandoned his flagship for a faster vessel. This retreat marked the turning point. With both leaders fleeing the battle, many of Antony's ships surrendered, and the tide completely turned in Octavian's favor. Octavian's victory at Actium was huge. He effectively destroyed much of Antony's fleet, and the defeat forced Antony and Cleopatra to retreat to Egypt. Their power was significantly weakened, and soon Octavian's forces were marching on Alexandria. By 30 BC, after another defeat, both Antony and Cleopatra took their own lives, marking the end of their reign and the beginning of Rome's control over Egypt. The loss at Actium also marked the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty, and Egypt became a province of Rome. The battle has been remembered throughout history, often portrayed as a tragic love story mixed with political ambition. 8. No one knows where she's buried. The mystery of Cleopatra VII's burial site has fascinated people for centuries, and despite many efforts to uncover it, we still don't know exactly where she was laid to rest. Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt, died in 30 BC after her defeat by Octavian and the suicide of her lover, Mark Antony. Historical accounts say that she was buried alongside Antony, but no one seems to know where their tomb is. Ancient historians like Plutarch and Cassius Dio mentioned that Cleopatra's tomb was lofty and beautiful, and it was located near a temple dedicated to the goddess Isis, who Cleopatra closely identified with. But these descriptions lack key details that would help pinpoint the exact location. So, over the years, many theories have been proposed about where her tomb might be. The most commonly suggested location for Cleopatra's burial is in Alexandria, Egypt's bustling capital at the time. Alexandria was an important cultural and political center, and it seems fitting that Cleopatra, the last ruler of Egypt, would be buried there. However, much of ancient Alexandria has been lost due to earthquakes and tsunamis, so some believe that parts of the city, including her tomb, could be underwater. Another theory that's gained a lot of attention in recent years is the site of Taposiris Magna, a temple complex located about 30 kilometers west of Alexandria. This site was dedicated to Isis, and archaeologist Kathleen Martinez has been excavating it for over a decade. Her team has uncovered artifacts like coins with Cleopatra's image and inscriptions mentioning her name. These discoveries suggest that Cleopatra might indeed be buried there. In 2022, they found a long tunnel that could be connected to her tomb, which has sparked hope that they're on the right track. Other potential sites include the royal necropolis at Al-Qurun Fuda, a burial ground near Alexandria used by members of the Ptolemaic dynasty, and the Temple of Isis at Philae, located on an island in the Nile River. Some researchers even speculate that her tomb could be in more remote locations, perhaps hidden in the desert or submerged in the Mediterranean Sea. Despite the promising leads, no one has yet found conclusive evidence to link any of these sites directly to Cleopatra's tomb. Alexandria's underwater ruins are particularly challenging to explore, and many of the sites have been disturbed over the centuries. Zahi Hawass, a famous Egyptologist who worked with Martinez on this search, announced in 2022 that no solid results had come from their excavation at Taposiris Magna. He emphasized that more research is needed and that other possible locations should be explored. 9. She spoke 9 languages. Cleopatra was so much more than just a queen in love. She was a scholar and a polyglot who used her knowledge to navigate the tricky political world she ruled. Cleopatra was born in Alexandria, which was home to one of the greatest libraries in the ancient world, the Library of Alexandria. This library wasn't just a place full of books, it was a center for learning, attracting scholars and intellectuals from all over. Cleopatra received a top-tier education, studying everything from history and geography to mathematics, alchemy, and even medicine. She was also fascinated by science and is said to have experimented with herbs and poisons, showing her skills as a chemist. While much of her work was lost after the library was destroyed, later scholars like Galen still reference some of her recipes, especially for cosmetics and medicines, showing how far her knowledge stretched. But what really set Cleopatra apart from other rulers of her time was her ability to speak multiple languages. She was said to have known up to 9 languages, which was pretty impressive, considering how many different cultures and people she interacted with. She spoke Greek, which was the language of the Hellenistic world in her native tongue, but she also learned Egyptian. This was a big deal because her family, the Ptolemies, had ruled Egypt for centuries, but they didn't speak the language of the people they ruled. Cleopatra, however, made a point of learning Egyptian to connect with her subjects and show respect for their culture, which helped solidify her authority as queen. On top of Greek and Egyptian, Cleopatra could also speak languages like Ethiopian, Troglodyte, Hebrew or Aramaic, Arabic, Syrian, and even languages from the ancient Parthian Empire. Her ability to speak all these languages made her an incredible diplomat, able to communicate directly with leaders from all over the Mediterranean and the Near East. This skill allowed her to negotiate treaties and alliances without relying on an interpreter, giving her an edge in political discussions. Her multilingualism also helped her build a public image as a cosmopolitan ruler. In a world where rulers were often seen as detached from the cultures they governed, Cleopatra used her knowledge of different languages and cultures to show that she was a bridge between East and West, between Egypt and the rest of the Hellenistic world. This made her an appealing figure, not just to her Egyptian subjects, but to the foreign dignitaries she interacted with as well. 10. An ASP bite didn't kill her. Cleopatra's death has always been one of the most fascinating and mysterious stories in history. Most people have heard the famous story. After losing everything, Cleopatra allowed a venomous asp to bite her, ending her life in a dramatic and symbolic act. It's a powerful image, a tragic queen meeting her end with a snake, representing both death and royalty. But how true is that story? Well, historians have been debating it for years, and it turns out there's a lot more to the story than the legend suggests. To understand Cleopatra's final moments, you need to look at the situation she was in. It was 30 BCE, and things weren't going great for her. Mark Antony, her lover and ally, had just been defeated by Octavian at the Battle of Actium. After Antony's suicide, Cleopatra was left to face Octavian alone. She knew that being captured by him would mean public humiliation. Paraded through Rome as a defeated queen, stripped of her dignity. Cleopatra wasn't about to let that happen, so she decided to take matters into her own hands. The story of the ASP comes from Roman writers like Plutarch and Cassius Dio. They claimed Cleopatra smuggled a snake into her chambers, hidden in a basket of figs, and used it to deliver a fatal bite. The idea stuck partly because it was dramatic, and partly because snakes held symbolic meaning in Egyptian culture. They represented both protection and power, so it felt fitting for a queen like Cleopatra. But there are some serious doubts about this tale. Cobras, the type of snake likely referred to, are large and not exactly easy to hide. Plus, their venom doesn't work instantly, and it's hard to imagine a snake biting multiple people quickly and effectively. Some historians think Cleopatra might have used poison instead. She was known to be well versed in chemistry and toxins, so it's entirely possible she had a deadly ointment or potion ready. There's even speculation she could have applied poison with a hairpin. This theory makes a lot more sense if you think about the logistics, but it doesn't have the same dramatic flair as the ASP story, which might explain why it didn't catch on as much. After Cleopatra's death, Egypt fell into Roman hands, marking the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty and Egypt's independence.